and the Cayman Islands government the need for ReGen's infrastructure. Also, Ms. Jeannie Banks-Petrie, the Director of the Cayman Islands Department of Environment, also in the front row, importance of the EIA process she'll be discussing. Richard McAree, the Environmental Social Governance Program Manager for DART, he'll be discussing the infrastructure timeline and introduce all of the consultants besides that are not here on the head table. Blair Schonecker, the Principal Senior Waste and Environmental Planner, will discuss the hydrology and land quality, cumulative effects, environmental management plan, and more. Erica Brown will discuss waste and environment planner. She'll discuss the landscape, visual, and socioeconomic. Gord Rusing, who's the Principal Air, Noise, and Greenhouse Gas Services at GHD Limited, imagine what he'll be discussing. Laura Lohr will be the Principal Vice President at GHD, and she'll be discussing terrestrial. And we also have Mr. Dennis Murphy from APEC Consulting on the stand as well. Gentlemen, ladies, thank you for being here tonight, and it is my pleasure to invite Mr. Troy Jacob of the Ministry to make his presentation.
Thank you, Jay. With protocol having been established by Jay, good evening, everyone. And well, tonight's public meeting, which is being held as part of the Environmental Impact Assessment for ReGen, the Cayman Islands Energy and Recycling Center. On behalf of the joint project team, I would like to thank everyone who has joined us in person tonight, as well as everyone who is watching live on CIG TV or social media. We know you have busy schedules, and we appreciate you taking the time to learn more about the project and the environmental impact assessment process. I'm pleased to be here tonight representing the Ministry of Sustainability and Climate Resiliency, which was established in 2021 by the current administration and led by Honorable Wayne Fanton, the Premier and Minister for Sustainability and Climate Resiliency. Our mission in the ministry is to cultivate a lasting legacy of sustainability in the Cayman Islands by achieving environmental, social, and economic balance, with a view to maximizing benefits across all three areas of this triple bottom line to make the lives of current and future generations better. Apart from our core ministry team, which includes finance, human resources, and the policy teams for energy, environment, and resilience, we also have oversight of the Department of Environment, Hazard Management Cayman Islands, and the National Weather Service. The concepts of sustainability and sustainable development have different meanings to different people. In the ministry, our dedication to building a lasting legacy of sustainability in the Cayman Islands is rooted in our mission as a world-class civil service, making the lives of those we serve better. Although many people tend to think only of the environment when they hear the word sustainability, the definition of sustainable development that the Cayman Islands government subscribes to is development that meets the needs of present generations without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. As the Premier often says, sustainability is really about ensuring peace and prosperity of future generations. It's about protecting our planet so it can continue to support our people. I think we can all agree that continuing to landfill our waste is not sustainable. It limits our ability to grow as a jurisdiction and puts our tourism product at risk. It impacts the health of our natural environments, and it affects our communities, which have to deal with unpleasant odors and the risk of fires. That's why we need a modern, sustainable solution to solid waste management in the Cayman Islands, one that benefits our economy, protects our environment, and better serves our people, both now and into the future. It was with this goal in mind that the Cayman Islands government established the National Solid Waste Management Strategy in 2016, which sets out key policies and objectives for the delivery of an integrated solid waste management system, now known as ReGen. The Ministry of Sustainability and Resiliency took over responsibility for the ReGen project in October 2021. Since that time, our team, working closely with multiple agencies across the Cayman Islands government, has been steadily progressing negotiations with the DART Consortium in order to achieve financial close and move from the procurement phase of the project to the implementation and construction phase. Earlier this month, we agreed a revised financial close date of 30th September, and the joint project team continues to work to meet this date. We understand that there may be some confusion and some frustration with the length of time that these negotiations have taken. However, I can say from first-hand experience that the length of time taken for the project negotiation reflects both the complexity of the project and the project team's desire to ensure ReGen represents as best as possible a fiscally, socially, and environmentally sustainable investment for the people of the Cayman Islands. To that end, we know there is a lot of interest in A, the costs associated with the project, and B, the details of the negotiation. However, please understand that neither the Cayman Islands government nor the DART Consortium are able to discuss the specifics of the negotiations at this stage due to the commercial sensitivities and as the costs of the project are still being finalized between the parties. Project costs will be shared with the public once financial close has been achieved. While the government is confident in our ability to manage the existing landfill footprint to its fullest until the ReGen facilities are commissioned and operational, which is now anticipated to be in 2027, there is no doubt that our country urgently needs an integrated solution for solid waste management that will significantly lower the amount of waste being landfilled. ReGen consists of 9 integrated facilities designed to work together to reduce the amount of waste being landfilled by up to 95%. These facilities, which include expanded composting and recycling facilities, as well as energy recovery, also known as the waste-to-energy plant, will help to move the Cayman Islands up the waste management hierarchy. In this model, reduce, reuse, and recycling sit at the top of an inverted pyramid, followed by recovering energy from waste, and finally, disposal. Disposal in a new, fully lined landfill will be the last resort under the ReGen model. The Cayman Islands government recognizes that the ReGen facilities will be a significant shift from our current practices. We all have a part to play in reducing what we consume, reusing items whenever possible, and taking advantage of the recycling opportunities available to us. To support this shift in behavior and mindset, ReGen increase our awareness about the waste hierarchy and to promote sustainable waste management habits for individuals and organizations. I also want to recognize ongoing work by the Ministry of Health and Wellness and the Department of Environmental Health to safely collect and treat solid waste in the Cayman Islands, clean up illegal dumping grounds, and reduce litter in our islands. Recently, the Department of Environmental Health launched a wheeled bin project, or pilot project, along a selected route in the Prospect community. The introduction of wheeled bins in the collection of residential waste brings government a step closer to expanding this collection system to the rest of the Cayman Islands. In an effort to crack down on illegal dumping and foster a stronger sense of accountability and community responsibility, the Beautification Task Force, in collaboration with the Ministry of Tourism and Ports, recently launched a new anti-littering campaign. And the Cayman Islands Cabinet recently approved the issuance of drafting instructions for a prohibition to restrict importation of certain single-use plastic items into the Cayman Islands. Our ministry is currently working with the Ministry of Border Control and Labor and the Legal Drafting Department to progress this project, and we look forward to sharing more detailed timelines as the legal drafting process advances. In all of these efforts, we need your support and buy-in. whether as individuals, organizations, or communities. There's a lot we can do to embrace change necessary to make our daily habits more sustainable. Although ReGen is expected to make the shift to a more sustainable solid waste management system much easier, we do not have to wait for these facilities to be built in order to begin making changes in our lives. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Long before these words were being used, Caymanians were practicing these sustainable habits. Well, perhaps the reduce part was more out of necessity than choice. Past generations of Caymanians strove to make the best use of limited resources that were available. We creatively reused and repurposed items, and we respected the natural environment that provided food, shelter, and our way of life. We were creative, resourceful, and we took pride in our homes and communities. These days, we're blessed with so many more resources than the previous generations had, but we can continue to embody these same values when we today practice to reduce, reuse, recycle, when we participate in island-wide cleanups, and when we take care to dispose of our garbage properly. We still have several years to go before the ReGen facilities are built and fully commissioned. During that time, we need to continue to make strides as individuals, as organizations, and as a country to be more efficient in our consumption and reduce waste, reuse items whenever we can, take advantage of the existing opportunities to recycle, and show our support for the children, the people, and the organizations in our community who are taking steps to be more sustainable. With that, I want to thank you all once again for joining us to learn more about the ReGen project and the outcomes of the environmental studies that have been taking place over the last several months. I do hope that you are able to leave this meeting tonight feeling more informed about the ReGen project and its expected benefits to our people, our economy, and our environment. On behalf of the joint project team, I encourage you to please take full advantage of this opportunity to provide your feedback on the project and have your questions about the environmental impact assessment answered. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Troy. I'd like to invite the Director of the Department of Environment, Jeannie Petrie, up to this podium for her presentation.
Good evening, everyone. My job this evening is to take you very briefly through the environmental impact assessment process, where we are at now, remind you where we've come from, and talk a little bit about where we're going. So environmental impact assessment is a process designed to provide decision makers with the relevant information on the likely significant effects, both positive and negative, of a proposed project or plan on the wider environment. So that includes humans, the physical environment, and the natural environment. The ultimate aim of an environmental impact assessment is to safeguard the environment through the identification of likely adverse effects and the application of measures which are designed to either avoid them or to mitigate the scale and scope of the anticipated impacts. Importantly, the EIA itself does not make a decision as to whether to authorize the project to move forward or not. That is left up to the relevant decision makers. In this case, for the ReGen project, the decision maker will be Cabinet. In Cayman, the EIA process is governed by the EIA Directive, which was published under the National Conservation Act in 2016. It sets out the various steps in the EIA process, seen on the process ladder to the right of the screen, and establishes an environmental assessment board, which is a subcommittee of the National Conservation Council, to manage that process, ensuring that the concerns of the NCC and of you, the general public, have been articulated in the terms of reference for the EIA, and that these have been adequately studied and addressed by the EIA consultants. The EIA directive establishes that the EAB is chaired by the Director of the Department of Environment, with the Director of Planning and the Deputy Director in the DOE responsible for research and assessment as permanent members. Other members of the EAB are appointed dependent on the project under review. For the ReGen EIA, members of the EAB, other members of the EAB include representatives from the Department of Environmental Health, the Water Authority Cayman, and the National Roads Authority. Some of you may remember that in October 2021, the public were invited to provide input to the terms of reference for this EIA. This evening's meeting is to report on the results of the studies and assessments that were prescribed by the terms of reference. And this information has been captured in the draft environmental statement for the project. In a few minutes, the ReGen EIA consultants, GHD and others, will tell us more about the results of the various topics that were studied and assessed during the environmental impact assessment. While the EAB has conducted a preliminary review of the various technical assessments and studies that are summarized in the environmental statement, we would encourage you, the general public, to also review the document against the published terms of reference to ensure that your concerns have been adequately addressed. You may download the draft environmental statement and the non-technical summary of the environmental statement, and this non-technical summary is basically meant to set out the findings of the EIA in a way that the average person can read and understand it very quickly. So you can find both of those documents at the link to the DOE's website, shown on the screen or by scanning the QR code. The environmental statement and the non-technical summary are available on the NCC and ReGen websites as well. Hard copies of both documents are also available at the DOE's offices on the North Sound Road, the Government Administration Building, the Georgetown and Boddentown Public Libraries, the District Admin offices on the BRAC, and the National Trust House on the Little Cayman. Being cognizant of the fact that there is a draw on everyone's time and that some people may not be able to attend either of the 3 public meetings that are being held this week, the GHD consultants have also organized a virtual engagement room, and you heard Jay speak about that earlier. Here you can review the information boards that you were hopefully able to take a look at before the formal start of this meeting, as well as access the various studies and assessments that underpin the environmental statement. There will also be a feedback form in the virtual engagement room with the opportunity for you to provide feedback in that way. Obviously, if you have feedback after hearing the presentations this evening, there are feedback forms available at the back of the room, which you can fill out and leave in the marked containers. You may also take the forms away, fill them out, and email them to the DOE at emu.doe@gov.ky, or send them to the DOE's post office box, which is box 10202 KY1-1002. In accordance with EIA directive, we need to receive all public feedback by midnight on September 7th. So I hope you can see that we've tried to provide you with a variety of options to access EIA documentation, and we would very much value your input on the draft environmental statement, even if it is only to confirm that your concerns have been adequately addressed. That is also an important piece of feedback. So please take advantage of this period of public consultation and provide us with your feedback through the various means provided, which are all highlighted on this slide here for you to take down. You can take a picture of the slide if you'd like, but we really would like your input. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm now going to turn it over to Richard.
Richard, she did my job for me. Come on up, we'll have you introduce Mr. Richard McCurry is the Environmental Social Governance Program Manager at DART.
Thank you, Jay. Good evening and welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming out this evening. Thank you for those that have dialed in or are watching our live stream on CIGD TV. It's a long-winded title that Jay's given an explanation of my role, but the shorter version is I'm the project manager on behalf of the DART Consortium for the EIA, and it's been my privilege working on this transformational project of national significance that we're going through at the moment and considering the EIA. I really am encouraged that people come out to look to learn and understand about the project. There has been a huge amount of work that has gone into this EIA by all parties involved. I really just want to scope very quickly the who is involved, why, where, and what it is in very short order. The who is really a public-private partnership between the Cayman Islands government and the DART Consortium, who were identified as a preferred bidder during the procurement process. The DART Consortium is made up of both DART and its investment partner Iona Capital, who are based in the UK, who have a vast amount of experience in the development of waste infrastructure, including energy from waste and recycling and recovery facilities. Obviously, as part of that, we also have a network of very experienced contractors who will be involved in the development of the facilities once we get through the EIA, the permitting process, and obviously, with positive intent, get to financial close. So those are the key parties involved, and it has been, as has been previously mentioned, a protracted process at times with regards to negotiation, but it is a very, very complicated and in-depth contract, and is developing intergenerational infrastructure that will be available and provide positive benefit to the Cayman Islands for decades to come. It's a 25-year contract with the DART Consortium, but the reality is the infrastructure that we're developing actually has project life in significant excess of that, 40, 45, 50 years. So very, very significant and important infrastructure to develop sustainable waste management on the island. The why are we doing it? Well, there's also been late mention of that. Principally, waste management has been undertaken through the utilisation of the Georgetown landfill, an online landfill, which has been the principal disposal facility. That is considered, I think, by most as no longer sustainable in moving forward. So it's a replacement of that. It should also be borne out that the landfill itself is rapidly running out of capacity. So there has to be an alternative developed on these islands, and particularly in relation to ACO Jacob's points, the reality is the Cayman Islands do need to move to improved infrastructure and sustainable waste management that will allow them to perform at a global scale into the future in managing waste appropriately. It's fair to say that this transition into the new infrastructure will involve a lot of parties. It will certainly involve opportunities for the DEH to expand collection and recycling systems over time to utilise the entirety of the integrated waste infrastructure. A number of elements were mentioned. We'll come on to the energy recovery facility, but it does cover things like the ongoing management of end-of-life vehicles, composting, expansion of the material recovery facilities, household waste recycling centres, a new medical waste incinerator. Cayman is obviously seeing an expansion in its medical services, both for locals and for medical tourism, with the increase of hospitals. So facility that are being sized appropriately to manage the waste volumes available on the island now, but also into the future, which is an important question that does come up fairly common. The where, well, I think people in the room dialing in will understand where the Georgetown landfill is, and the site itself is located to the south of the existing Georgetown landfill. So hopefully most people are seeing a fairly solid improvement into the remediation of the original North Mound, and that mound is greening up quite nicely now. We now have the current operational area of the Georgetown landfill at the northern extremity next to the ETH, which will continue south, while the ReGen facilities are going through construction. But the ReGen facilities themselves are to the southern end of the site. Principally, you've got the energy recovery facility, you've got the residual waste landfill, as been mentioned, you've got a facility to deal with bottom ash as a byproduct from the energy recovery facility, materials that can be used as secondary aggregate, and we'll pull the metals out of those, and those will be recycled. We've got an area for the medical waste incinerator, we've got an area for the end-of-life vehicles and the material recovery facility, and a construction and demolition waste facility. So most of these facilities don't currently exist on islands. We've got landfill, we've got some recycling with recycling banks placed in the car parks, the bring banks, and we've got an element of mulching and shredding of organic material that's utilised as cover material in the operational landfill. So it truly is a significant change in the infrastructure available on the island, and how people will be able to access it, and the opportunities that DEH will have to expand and grow their service offering on the island. I get posed quite a lot regarding energy from waste plant. It's obviously the most significant element of the project, managing the greatest volume of waste. It manages all those materials that aren't or can't be readily recycled. I can assure everybody that this is proven technology. There are many hundreds of these plants operating throughout the world. It's mass combustion, whereby the waste is delivered to the plant, it gets tipped into a large bunker, where some cranes are used to mix the waste and homogenise the waste. It then gets put into a grate, which has that's the burning aspect of the process, where it goes through complete combustion. That combustion is essentially a fuel. That fuel generates steam through a boiler, and the boiler then, or the steam then, goes on to generate a turbine that generates electricity that will be exported into the CEC grid to service the homes and businesses on the island. And essentially, we're going to be generating about 8.5 megawatts, so not an insignificant power generation aspect of the project. The byproducts of that will be managed appropriately. I've explained the bottom ash element of that. The additional element then is the fly ash, or the air pollution control residue, which is identified. All of these elements are identified in the EIA, and through an understanding through extensive modelling that we'll hear from our consultants on. We'll be managing that air pollution control system to the highest global environmental standards available, which are currently a European standard, the EU Industrial Emission Directive standards. Those results and how that methodology and transparency will be clear once they're in operations, and that standard and those figures will be available for people to see and to understand that the plant is performing as per its design and as it should be. So this is very much an opportunity to clean the local environment. We are generating a net positive impact to the island by way of the environment through the closure of the landfill and the introduction of energy from waste in these other facilities, essentially reducing carbon output by about 23,000 tonnes. In fact, when the landfill is eventually closed, that figure will rise, and so it will equate to somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 cars, possibly more, being taken off the road to Cayman. I think at times, certainly the traffic sit-in, we'd all like to see that. So, from a technical perspective and a strategic solution, that really is all I have to say. A very important aspect of what I want to get across tonight is how positive the collaboration has been, both between ourselves and GHD as our technical consultants, but I would also like to reflect my thanks to the DOE and the EAB. They have reviewed our chapters in an iterative way, in a timely way, and in a very positive and transparent way, so we can get to a point and a solution through a mechanism of having a very solid draft document for you to review and provide your commentary against, and that truly does, I believe, support the further development of this project. And I would also like to give my thanks to the DEH team and the lab team who came out and worked very collaboratively with the DART team that were undertaking the air quality assessment while that was being undertaken on island. It developed the opportunity for cross-working, training opportunities, and that's the very end of the way to what this project can do by way of training, jobs and future opportunities for Caymanians. So on that, I would commend you to please look at the boards, please take a leaf of the way, please submit your questions. We look forward to responding to those and integrating them as appropriate into the final EIA document. Thank you. I'll do an introduction. Sorry, Jay. I was leading you on too soon. So the main GHD consultants have already been introduced tonight. We also have Dennis Murphy from APEC, who will be talking to the traffic study. But online we also have via Zoom a couple of people in the UK who are having a very late night now. Andy Wilson, who's been heavily involved on both the EIA and the design and technical aspects of the project, but particularly talking to land quality this evening. We have Liz Young in the UK, who's a subject matter expert on hydrology, and we have Mike and Shelley, who, if required, can talk to further technical questions around the noise assessment. So on that note, I will hand over to Blair. Thank you very much.
I just want to echo our thanks for everyone coming out tonight, taking time. So, not meant to repeat the summary that Ms. Gina just provided, but I did want to focus in on number 6 here, on the baseline studies and the impact assessment. Just talk a little bit about that as we get into the description of the results from the environmental impact assessment. So there's really 3 layers to that particular step. There's the baseline conditions aspect, the review of the potential effects of the project or on the environment and the significance evaluation of those effects, and then also an assessment of cumulative effects. So those three layers to the EIA process itself. So with respect to the baseline conditions, it's really necessary to define the current baseline conditions in order to compare what the future conditions with the implementation of this potential project would look like, and whether these conditions are likely to change. So each of the technical disciplines that are going to present tonight provides an overview of their baseline or existing conditions as really the foundation to their respective impact assessments. Essentially, what is there right now today? What's there on the ground? What's there in the air? How many existing cars are on the road? What do the existing views look like today? Again, it's in absence of the proposed ReGen facility. And so once that baseline is established, that's when we move to the next step of the next layer of the EIA process, which is for the project team to first predict what the potential effects of the project components and activities are on the broad definition of the environment. And when I say broad definition of the environment, I mean natural environment, social environment, cultural, technical, economic. Those are all the types of elements that we're going to be describing here tonight and that are summarized in the draft environmental statement. So the team uses that baseline information and the existing conditions that have been collected as part of step 1, in conjunction with how the project will be constructed and operated in order to determine what the potential effects on the environment will be. Another example, how might the construction of the project affect the landscape or change the views for an existing resident, and how do we measure that? How might they contribute to the existing background noise levels, and how do we model that? An important piece of this particular layer is also to determine what mitigation measures should be applied. And by mitigation measures, I mean, how can you reduce, eliminate, or control those potential effects? So the project team reviewed each of the potential effects that were identified for the respective technical discipline. We applied mitigation measures to reduce or avoid the effect, and that helped us to determine the net or residual remaining effect. After this, a really key piece is to be able to identify, if you have a residual effect, what's the significance of that effect? You can have a very small effect, but it's very important for you to identify whether that is a significant or a non-significant effect. And so we look at a number of different criteria in order to determine the significance of the effect, and that includes things like the magnitude, the duration, right? Is it temporary? Is it permanent? The frequency and the geographic extent. Is it only on a site basis, or is it at a regional scale? So all those criteria factor into the determination of the significance of effects, and we rank those from negligible to major. Those are all documented in the environmental statement, and those are the types of things that we're going to talk about here tonight as a summary for each of the technical disciplines. That last layer is really to look at cumulative effects. So what do I mean by cumulative effects? Well, cumulative effects assessment looks at the potential interaction between our proposed project in combination with other existing or proposed or what we call reasonably foreseeable projects. And really it's, is there any layering overlap between the effects that we've identified and effects from existing or proposed projects in the area? These cumulative effects are also documented in the environmental statement, and I'll come back later on this evening to talk about cumulative effects. So quick note as well, too, we're in the review of that drafted environmental statement, and we're looking for feedback. Consultation is a cornerstone of the EIA process, and that includes with agencies and with members of the public. So we look forward to answering any questions that you may have. Similarly with this slide, not to reiterate Ms. Gina's summary on an environmental statement, but I did want to reiterate that we do have that non-technical summary that is available for review, and that really highlights the so what, right, of the environmental statement. If you're looking for a very succinct overview of the studies and the results. I always like to describe the non-technical summary should be written in a manner that, I could explain one of these projects that I'm working on to my 100-year-old grandmother. So that's the way we try to write the NTS. You can see the consultant team here tonight, and that includes GHD and APEC. And so we're going to go through each of the environmental components that were presented in the environmental statement. So each of the technical disciplines are going to run through their results. First we're going to call up Ms. Laura Lawler with respect to the natural environment.
Thanks very much, Blair, and happy to be here tonight with you. We're going to begin with the marine ecology side here. So we completed the background information reviews to get a sense of the project's marine environment with a focus on the marine and coastal habitats, wildlife, the protected species, and the significant natural areas. The study area includes the North Sound and wider coastal waters extending from the mean high water mark on Grand Cayman to 12 nautical miles out from there. So looking at both that immediate near-shore coastal as well as the broader adjacent marine environment. This review included a desktop review of the habitats, habitat identification and mapping, protected species studies, all with the intention of characterizing that marine ecology and environment in proximity to the site. To Blair's comment earlier around our explanation around the process that we went through here, The results of that first existing conditions study includes that the Cayman Islands has a network of marine protected areas, particularly related to Grand Cayman. There are a number of nearshore and coastal environments that are protected, such as the coastal mangroves and seagrass beds. And further, that there is a high diversity of marine species associated with these habitats. When we're looking at the effects of the proposed ReGen development, we're looking at the impacts here, and what's key to understand is that at this stage, the ReGen facility has no anticipated direct discharges to the marine environment, and so from that, there are no anticipated impacts or significant impacts to the marine environment. The aspects that were considered in accordance with the terms of reference include vessel strikes, impacts to North Sound, mangroves, and seagrass beds. Without that direct influence, we don't have that situation of direct impact. The vessels that will be associated with transferring any of the waste between the sister islands and Grand Cayman itself will be using existing docking facilities, so there's no proposed development along the shoreline separate from this facility, but for those ancillary sorts of uses. While their habitat and wildlife interference or strikes may be possible in that transference of the supply barge between the islands, the evaluation is that the risk of these strikes will be the same as under current supply barge pathways and movements between the sister islands. So the idea is that the locations from which and through which the supply barge will be moving are the same as under current situations. In addition to this, so we've looked at both the impact component, the significance assessment of it, and then if we're thinking of those additional mitigative opportunities for both the construction and the operation side of things. Erosion and sediment control is a key mitigation measure to ensure that even during those transitionary periods when there's more risk of anything leaving the property and getting into the waterways, that there will be erosion and sediment control monitoring put in place during the construction and operation phases. And by applying these proposed mitigation measures, best management practices, and restoration conditions for the on-site area, the potential residual effects on the marine environment within and around the site are considered to not be significant. Moving on to the terrestrial ecology component. Our team's ecologists have completed similarly the background information review to understand what the project's terrestrial environment is, with a focus on the habitats, wildlife, protected species, and significant natural areas again. In this case, the study area includes the site itself and the area within 1.2 miles or approximately 2 kilometers from the site. As part of the study, the consultation team collected and reviewed information from the Cayman Islands Department of Environment, online aerial mapping, the UK Overseas Territories and Crown Dependencies, Cayman Islands National Trust, and iNaturalist, so a combination of government sources as well as citizen science sources. The team also completed field reconnaissance assessment, collecting of existing conditions, and collection of site photos. And there was a fairly extensive data collection component that involved acoustic monitors and visual monitors, so motion-activated wildlife cameras, passive audio samplers for both birds and calling amphibians, as well as specific for echolocating bats. Those were in place for a number of months at the beginning of the study here. The results of these reviews and studies provided us with a summary of existing conditions that includes there are two nationally designated sites within the study area. The site consists of inland mangroves, filled land, poorly vegetated land, and bare ground. The site is mostly disturbed or developed under its current condition, and construction has occurred on adjacent properties. When we're looking at the impacts related from the proposed development on these, we characterize it by the proposed development will result in the removal of 33 acres of terrestrial habitat, of which 1.7 acres are inland mangrove. There have been a couple of questions that we were fielding just before the presentation here. So that 33 acres represents the footprint of the ReGen facility itself, and in its entirety. And for clarity, the mangroves that we're relating to are inland mangrove habitat. We're not talking about any coastal mangroves in this particular situation. During construction, there may be the potential for loss of vegetation that could otherwise serve as habitats for species that have been found within and around the landfill site. However, since the site itself is sparsely populated, much of it has been disturbed repeatedly over the years, it is not considered suitable for species to live in due to ongoing activities. Some faunal or wildlife species may be eliminated due to construction during site preparation, and other risks are sedimentation and erosion may occur as a result of may result as an indirect result of vegetation removal. So then if we take those potential effects and look at the residual effects once we have applied our mitigation components, the associated residual effects of vegetation loss, soil erosion, noise and vibration, and potential for spills to impact the environment. Monitoring will be in place during pre-construction, construction, and operation for both wildlife as well as that erosion and sediment control. So those are our key mitigation measures for impacts to the wildlife habitat and adjacent areas. There may be protected species in select areas throughout the site. The area where they have been associated with are primarily the inland mangroves to the west of the property, between the Esterly Tibbetts Highway and the property itself. And there's very limited direct impact to anything connected to that portion. To address any impacts, the recommended mitigation measures have been provided to be carried throughout construction and operation. And again, the focus of those are on the erosion and sediment control and visual monitoring for fauna, for wildlife to ensure that any direct interactions with them can be limited. Potential residual effects on the terrestrial environment have been determined to not be significant as a result of the application of these proposed mitigation measures and management best practices. And that finishes up our terrestrial component, and I'll pass things back to Blair for the hydrology and hydrogeology.
Thank you, Laura. So I'm going to cover off hydrology and hydrogeology and land quality in the next few slides. And so hydrology from a surface water perspective and hydrogeology from a groundwater perspective, that assessment included things like water quantity in terms of level and flow, water quality, surface water flows, and things like flood risk as well. So from a baseline and existing conditions perspective, we looked at it from the perspective of both surface water and groundwater. So the northern channel, fringed with mangroves and culverted below the Esterly Tibbetts Highway to the west of the site is one key aspect. And its water level fluctuates with tide and water, and that is potentially affected by leachate as well from the Georgetown landfill. Groundwater beneath the site is shown to be tidally influenced. So that results in a mixing of ocean, salt water, and fresh water, causing a transition zone of brackish water. The site is not considered to be close to any major freshwater lenses, and what we mean by that is layers of groundwater sort of floating above denser saltwater. And some of the groundwater and surface water data in the vicinity of the site have been sampled and analyzed. And some of those samples have shown that there's some substances that exceed some of the contaminant cleanup target levels. So important to have that information. From an impact perspective, we really look at things like, what are the impacts from a temporary dewatering during excavation perspective, or disposal of landfill leachate from the residual waste landfill, or tidal flooding is another key aspect. The key with this discipline as well, this technical discipline, is that there's a lot of mitigation measures that have been included in the design itself of the ReGen facility. And that'll help mitigate most of the impacts related to hydrology and hydrogeology. So things like the facility design standards, ensuring still water elevation, the base flood elevation, and design flood elevation are all based on Hurricane Ivan and US FEMA guidance. We incorporated appropriate storage and material handling, right, to ensure that it is handled properly and stored so as not to have any runoff from that material into other surface water bodies. And then certainly a key component is leachate management at the residual waste landfill itself, having a system to be able to collect the leachate and divert it to an appropriate facility to be treated. There's also a stormwater management plan that will be in place to deal with surface water that is not impacted by leachate from both a quality and a quantity perspective. Some of the other mitigation measures for the potentially significant impacts associated with the construction, operation, and of the ReGen facility are to ensure that detailed surface runoff management plan and collection and treatment options are encouraging appropriate infiltration of runoff to groundwater where possible, really to mimic that natural infiltration process. A detailed wastewater and sewage plan is going to be prepared that minimizes the risks of leaks and spills within the system. And that'll really look at considerations as well on changes to the local climate and sea level due to climate change. A waste management plan is going to be prepared as well, with waste management planning for emergency situations. And again, a little bit on the design as well too, but an appropriate grade of concrete is going to be used in the design so that in the design of the development that prevents sulfate attack and really that degradation of any of the infrastructure under its surface in the event of any groundwater contamination. Another key aspect is the sensitivity around flooding. So that has been incorporated, as I mentioned, into the site's design, and it will be included in the environmental management plan, which we'll talk about at the end of this presentation as well. And that includes, ensuring that the finished floor levels are elevated, the raised equipment are above anticipated floodwater levels. The built surfaces are directing floodwater away from sensitive infrastructure, and that a hazard management plan is used in response to any government-issued warnings. So with these mitigation measures adopted, the significance of these potential impacts are considered minor, except for the residual risk of tidal flooding and extreme weather and climate-induced flooding, which can cause effects to the site. Those are natural sort of effects that are out of the control of the user of the system, but with mitigation measures that have been put in place, we can adapt as much as possible to that potential issue. So from a land quality perspective, I think it's important to note, first and foremost, that really due to the current unsustainable design and practices at the Georgetown landfill and resulting impacts to the groundwater quality, The construction of the ReGen facility will likely result in net environmental benefit due to the improved waste management practices and facilities. Members of the GHC and APEC team examined the potential land quality impacts, and that includes things like land stability, wind-blown dust, land contamination that the ReGen would have on human health, and the ReGen infrastructure and surrounding land users themselves, like homes and businesses and schools. And the study really encompasses the footprint of the ReGen facility and some of the surrounding area as well, within about 250 yards or 230 meters. From an existing conditions perspective, really, where developed, land surrounding the site is formed from the reclamation of a former mangrove swamp. And from a topography perspective, the site elevation really ranges between 7 and 20 feet above mean sea level. There is some underground movement of landfill gases and vapors, and this is due to the existing unlined landfill. But it's very unlikely that any movement of gas from the landfill to the proposed ReGen facilities would cause any issues. So some of the impacts and mitigation, focusing in on some of the potential significant impacts to land and land quality from that geotechnical perspective can certainly be mitigated. But the low bearing capacity of the existing waste surface layer is going to be mitigated by transferring the development loads. Sinkholes and development foundational damage are going to be mitigated by installing geotextiles and geogrids. And from a ground instability perspective, that's going to be mitigated by avoiding cavity locations in bedrock. One final one, again, around sort of effects from the environment, similar to the flooding side of things. From natural events, earthquakes and seismic activity. As much as we would like to be able to forecast that, we can't, so we mitigate by design. We mitigate by ensuring that the ReGen facility is being designed in accordance with the codes around earthquakes and seismic activity, and that its piling and foundation systems would then withstand those effects. I think another important piece to mention is that there's data that is being collected to understand the current levels of contamination and that ground gas that I had mentioned, in order to assess impacts from a buried waste, existing waste, and contaminant concentrations perspective. And so we want to look at that from the perspective of any significant effects related to the health of site staff, construction workers, visitors, surrounding land users, especially when we identified them through the geo-environmental assessment, but more so because we want to ensure that there's a plan in place where if contaminated soils are found during construction, that they will be handled appropriately in accordance with a management plan. So ensuring that you've got any disturbance of the existing contamination during construction, you're managing that appropriately. You're ensuring that there's no spread of waste and contamination in floodwater or runoff. And so, although it is likely that any pre-existing wastes on site that are present will not result in an unacceptable level of contamination, those established procedures will ensure that filling materials during construction don't contain any hazardous materials. So the construction and operation of the ReGen facility is expected to result in net long-term environmental benefits, particularly compared to the current unsustainable design and impacts to soil and groundwater quality of the current Georgetown landfill. Next up is my colleague Gord Roising, and he's going to present on air quality and greenhouse gas, as well as noise.
Good evening. I'm happy to be here to talk about air and noise studies that we did for this project. Realizing it's a lot of information you're absorbing here tonight, and try to make this interesting as possible. First of all, let's talk about greenhouse gases. This project is very positive for the environment in terms of greenhouse gas reduction. We're all concerned about climate change. As Richard mentioned earlier, why is it better? Because landfills produce landfill gas. Landfill gas has lots of methane, and methane has a very high global warming potential. So this project will stop the future generation of methane from landfilling of that waste. When waste is combusted, it just produces CO2, which is also a greenhouse gas, but it's got 25 times less global warming potential. So it's a very positive thing to stop landfilling waste and put it through this energy from waste system. The methane that is being generated from the existing landfill is also going to be collected and combusted as part of the remediation program. So again, there's a benefit there. And then thirdly, the energy from waste facility is generating electricity. And that electricity is displacing electricity that is currently being generated from the combustion of fossil fuel. As you know, it's being produced from diesel fuel combustion right now at the CUC. So all of these are resulting in a very positive impact to reducing greenhouse gases. Right, next I want to talk about the air quality assessments. So these are the air contaminants that are being emitted from the facility. We did a lot of work. I have a couple of slides to show you on that. First thing we did was identify all of the air contaminants that could possibly be emitted from a facility like this. And it's there, as Richard said, there's hundreds of these around, so it's very well known what the air contaminants are. But we identified those. We also looked for the applicable air quality standards, and we used the most stringent standards in the UK for air quality. The UK also has a standard for the performance of like an energy from waste type combustion system. So we use that as well. And this facility will have best available control technology. So the emissions will be as low as possible. So the next thing we did was try to establish what the background air quality is in the study area here. And so we did a 4-month air monitoring program. We set up 7 air monitoring stations around the site. We tried to cover both the rainy season and the dry season. There was our main monitoring station was at Cox Lumber here, station number 1. And that was chosen because it's pretty much directly downwind of the prevailing winds of the new facility. You can see that there are a number of other monitoring stations around, as well as that one that did some continuous monitoring and some grab sample type monitoring. And there's about 20 different air contaminants that were monitored, including families of contaminants with multiple contaminants included, like VOCs or volatile organic compounds, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, dioxinfurans, metals, and so on. So we did all this monitoring and collected all the data. And then we took a pretty conservative approach, was the 90th percentile, so it's higher than the average value. We used that as the representative background concentration for the air contaminants in the area. The next thing we did was a modeling study for nitrogen oxides, because nitrogen oxides is the main air pollutant on the island. It comes from fuel combustion, and there's lots of fuel combustion going on. We included all of these sources as shown in the diagram. So the airport, the CUC, lots of industrial facilities, concrete facilities, Cayman Spirits, asphalt plant. And then we also included all of the major arterial roads, the Esterly Tibbetts Highway and major arterial roads in the area. We calculated what the NOx, nitrogen oxides emissions would be from all of these sources, put them all into a model, and calculated what the values would be at all of the monitoring stations where we also were monitoring for NOx. We did all this to gain some trust in the data that we were collecting. And as our report shows, and I'm pleased to say, the monitoring results that we did for 4 months matched up really nicely with the modeling that we did for nitrogen oxides. So that gives us a lot of confidence in the ambient air monitoring data that we collected. So the last thing that we did was modeling of the actual new facility. So we calculated what the emissions would be from all of the different sources. A modeling grid that was pretty big, 2 kilometers in every direction. It had over 5,500 grid points. So we calculated concentrations at all of these grid points. We ran 5 years of meteorological data, which is about 44,000 hours of data. And we calculated the maximum concentrations that occur for every air contaminant that could be emitted off-site. Then we took an extremely conservative approach, which was take the maximum value that we modeled and use that as our estimated worst-case concentration that could be produced by the project off-site. Then for the cumulative effects analysis, we took the monitoring data that we collected for 4 months, and we added that to the modeling data to get the total for a cumulative effect analysis. And we compared that with the very stringent UK air quality standards. All of that came out very favorably. We were well below all of the UK standards, which are human health-based standards. So we can rest assured that the air emissions from the facility operations will not cause any health effects. I got a question earlier today about construction activities, and yeah, during construction, dust is a concern, and that will be handled with a construction dust management plan, typically just taking care of vehicle speeds, maintaining the roads, watering when necessary, and so on, and operator training to make sure that dust is not an issue during construction activities. We'll turn to the noise and vibration assessment now. Similarly to with the air quality, we did a monitoring program, not quite as big. We did 2 weeks of noise monitoring. We didn't really need to do as long a program for noise. We set up monitors to cover and estimate the noise levels at 6 different sensitive receptors that are representative of residential areas, the Camana Bay Hospital, and the International School. So we collected this noise data and we analyzed it. We came up with sort of minimum and maximum noise levels and average noise levels at all of these locations. Then for the modeling side of things, GHD specified numerous recommendations for noise abatement that would be typical of this type of facility. Things like silencers, barrier walls, low noise equipment and engines, building construction to keep the noise, say for the power turbine inside the building. So all of that, all of those recommendations were built into our modeling for the noise. And based on all of those assumptions and the modeling that we did, we determined that the estimated impact of the worst case noise levels during normal operation would be less than the average existing noise level. In fact, if you added them together, you wouldn't notice the difference. So essentially, we can say for noise, when you're comparing the modeled noise level with the average measured existing noise level, there would be no perceived difference. There may be times where, because noise fluctuates and background noise fluctuates, there may be time when there are noises that are noticeable, but on an average basis, you wouldn't see it. So that's the end of the noise presentation, and I will pass it over to Dennis for the transportation.
Hello, excuse me. Hello, my name is Dennis Murphy. I'm a civil engineer with APEC Consulting Engineers. We were asked to prepare a traffic statement, which is a typical requirement as part of environmental impact assessment. The statement, the scope of the statement was established in collaboration with the National Roads Authority at the end of last year. And the first part of that process is to establish a baseline. That was carried out with the use of automatic traffic counters being placed at key locations within the study area. This was supplemented with information provided to us by the National Roads Authority, most recently an island-wide 2017 traffic count, and that information was used to help establish the peak AM and PM traffic periods within the proposed study area. The study area was established with the National Roads Authority and consisted of Seymour Road, which runs to the proposed new facility, down to North Sound Road, and incorporates three junctions, one with the Butterfield Roundabout, one with the intersection of Seymour Road, and the third one to the east at the intersection with Dorsey Drive. The data and the study area was then used to prepare a network model using engineering software, analysis software. We then modeled three scenarios: the anticipated traffic loads at the day of opening of the facility, in the near term, 5 years hence, and in the medium term, another 5 years beyond. So the opening date plus 5 years plus 10 years, and ran the model with and without the proposed facility. And in summary, the existing levels of service particularly in the junctions, as most people know, is heavily congested with a very poor level of service in the AM and PM peak periods. The impact of the new facility on the area of question was found to be minor. And that's predominantly because mitigation measures that would normally be implemented, i.e. Waste collection services occurring outside of peak traffic periods, are already being implemented by the DEH as a response to the poor levels of service on the road network in the area. And the other element to note is that currently there are no plans to amend the methods or the routes of waste collections. So in other words, the current volumes of trucks entering and exiting the facility at the peak AM and PM periods, we do not anticipate them to increase significantly. So in summary, the impact of the new facility on the road network that is being serviced, it is anticipated to be minimal. Okay. And socioeconomics.
So the activities proposed during the construction and operation of the ISWIMs may affect people's way of life, their community, economic activity, and culture. The socioeconomic impact assessment examines these potential impacts. Research into the existing social and economic environments was completed to gain contextual understanding for the local study area of the District of Georgetown and the regional study area of the Cayman Islands, including demographics, population and census data, employment and economy, health and community well-being, services and infrastructure, and access and connectivity. Existing socioeconomic conditions were defined using census data, government planning documents, statistics from financial institutions, industry and NGO reports, as well as GIS mapping assets and information gathered through stakeholder consultation interviews. The Cayman Islands have experienced considerable population growth over the last decade, and the area plays host to a high foreign labor force and migrant population. The construction industry is the largest by employment in the Cayman Islands, making up more than 15% of the total labor force. The key potential positive socioeconomic impacts to occur during construction of the ISWIMs are primarily related to an increase in employment opportunities for Cayman residents, procurement opportunities for businesses to supply goods and services, and a minor increase in revenue for local businesses due to construction workers purchasing meals and other services. The potential temporary negative socioeconomic impacts that may occur during construction are a reduced sense of desirability or pleasantness for some residents, businesses, and community facilities in close proximity to construction activities, and minor disruptions to traffic conditions resulting in delays and the potential for increased travel times for people traveling in the local and regional area. The key socioeconomic benefits of the project during operation are primarily related to the regional economic benefits associated with the development of a new, technologically advanced method of dealing with solid waste and the diversification of the economy. In particular, the project has the potential for capacity building and upskilling of the existing workforce and provides opportunities for new business generation to support its operations in Cayman, as ERF technology is a new industry for the region. Additionally, due to the nature of the facility involving the production of green energy, the recovery and reuse of materials, and the overall improvements to current waste management practices in Cayman, residents may experience a sense of community pride associated with the contribution to the circular economy. This may in turn support the tourism industry to achieve its aspirations for sustainable and ecotourism practices as a large contributor to waste generation for Cayman. The key negative socioeconomic impacts during operation are related to the perception of health and safety risk associated with the operation of the project and potential changes to local amenity for some residents and businesses in close proximity to the ISWIM site due to changes in air quality, noise, and visual amenity. The socioeconomic opportunities impacts identified and assessed will be managed and mitigated and opportunities enhanced through a range of recommended measures. So now I'll present on the landscape and visual impact assessment. So members of the project team analyzed the effects of construction and operation of the proposed ISWIMs on the landscape, concentrating on effects to the landscape and townscape character, as well as the views and visual amenity of people who live, participate in recreational activities, work, or travel through the area around the site. The team defined a landscape and visual study area which extended approximately 3 miles from the site boundary and contains 5 landscape and seascape character zones defined as tourism foreshore and Georgetown Center, industrial waste and airport, residential settlement, mangroves and recreation, and Caribbean Sea and North Sound Lagoon. The site sits within an area of mixed, low-density residential neighborhoods with single-family homes and high-density commercial areas with multi-story buildings. Green spaces within the area are vegetated with mangroves, and the immediate area surroundings are zoned for industrial and commercial use. The potential landscape impacts from the ISWIMs include evaluating the effects of the change and development on the landscape as a resource. The potential impacts on landscape character were determined based on the sensitivity of the existing landscape and the magnitude of change that is likely to occur. The landscape assessment found that the project would have negligible to moderate impacts on the surrounding areas. There's a moderate effect associated with the industrial waste and airport landscape character zone, as the tall ventilation stack's height is found to have high visibility and represents the highest point of the project on the island. The residential settlement and Caribbean Sea and North Sound Lagoon landscape and seascape character zones were found to have minor effects due to the site not being located directly within those zones, and because the potential for the project's appearance to be partly mitigated by the current vegetation that would help obscure the facilities. Potential visual impacts of the ISWIMs include assessing the effects of change and development on the views available to people and their visual amenity from various locations. Visual considerations were evaluated from key vantage points where there is a particular interest in the view and where there are sensitive viewpoints. The visual assessment found that the project would range from having a minor to a major level of impact, depending on the viewpoint. And mitigation measures will be used to ensure that real-time landscape and visual changes are kept to a minimum. The visual assessment found that the project would have a major visual effect from the United Pentecostal Church viewpoint, which is that middle one there, from tall residential properties on 7 Mile Beach, from cruise liners anchored off 7 Mile Beach, and from the North Sound Lagoon, as users, residents, staff, and tourists at these locations are all assessed to have a high sensitivity to the change in viewpoints, with prolonged and permanently altered views where the project is located. A moderate visual effect is experienced from residential properties on lakeside villas, as a series of large industrial buildings and the ventilation stack are visible, but partly obscured behind the existing vegetation and tree line. Users of the National Gallery, as well as residential properties on Marble Drive, and users of the Camana Bay Observation Tower will experience a minor overall visual effect from the change in views brought on by the ISWIMs, as obstructions relegate the project to being mostly out of sight behind existing structures, vegetation, and tree lines. So that's it for landscape and visual, and I'll turn it back to Blair.
Okay, I mentioned that there were 3 kind of layers to the impact assessment side of things, and so this brings us to the 3rd layer on cumulative effects. And there's really 2 different types of cumulative effects that we look at, and that's inter-project effects and interrelated effects. So I'll talk about inter-project effects first, and that's really, looking at the proposed ReGen facility and looking at combination of the potential effects from the ReGen facility acting in combination with other committed or proposed developments. So some of the different types of committed and proposed developments that were considered included the Airport Connector Road, the Health City Camana Bay, the Hyatt Conversion and Palm Sunrise development, and then the rest of the planned area development for Camana Bay. And also, was identified in the terms of reference, so we included it to look at here as well, was the previously proposed crew berthing facility. So what's important there is, and Gord touched on this a little bit about from the air quality side of things, looking at existing development, layering in with the proposed ReGen facility. But another example that I can give you on the inter-project side of things is the Airport Connector Road, overlapping with both air and noise. I'll speak to the noise side of things, which is, due to the timing of the projects, and the construction of the Airport Connector Road and the Section 2 of the Airport Connection Road, there may be some overlap with the construction from the ReGen facility. Although that'll be temporary, we still looked at that from a potential cumulative effect perspective, because it could have a compounding impact. But given the mitigation measures that have been proposed for noise and the distance of the receptors, we determined that there were no cumulative impacts anticipated. And in fact, we determined that no significant cumulative effects were identified in relation to the ReGen project and other committed and proposed developments. So that's one example of a inter-project effect. The other is interrelated effect. And that really looks at whether any of the effects from the individual environmental topics that you heard here tonight that are create an effect from the proposed ReGen development could combine with one another to create effects that are really greater than the sum of the individual effects on a given receptor. And we really kind of looked at a common receptor as nearby homes here. So there's a potential for, local resident to be affected by, dust and noise and traffic disruption. So it's that and additive element, particularly during construction. But again, as we looked at the mitigation measures that are being put in place, these effects were shown to be reduced and then determined to not to be significant. And it wouldn't relate in a interrelated cumulative effect. Finally, the environmental management plan. We want to mention this as well because it's come up in some of the topics here tonight. But the results of the environmental impact assessment that are documented in the environmental statement, they're going to be used to develop an environmental management plan. And I want to note that this isn't just a requirement, an environmental management plan through the EIA directive and the legislation, but it's also good practice, right? To be able to show traceability between the environmental impact analysis and the proposed mitigation measures, bridging that to project implementation. So this plan is really going to form the basis for environmental monitoring and mitigation during the ReGen implementation, really helping to put into action the specific mitigation measures that were put in place to avoid or reduce those potential effects. It's also going to help record those monitoring activities that have been identified for a number of different technical disciplines that you heard from tonight. So it's really a mechanism of documenting all of the mitigation and monitoring measures and really demonstrate the standards and guidelines that are going to be followed, as well as the thresholds that are going to need to adhere to, and the format and frequency of the results reporting. I'll just close with this slide here, again, just to reiterate the various avenues for consultation and remind everyone that consultation is a cornerstone of the EIA process. We really appreciate you coming out tonight to hear about the ReGen facility and encourage you to take any of the avenues available, either hard copy, online, or the virtual engagement room to offer up any of your thoughts and comments on the project. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate that. First of all, before we get started with the question and answer, I just want to go over some ground rules. Please raise your hands and we'll bring a microphone to you as we're broadcasting this live as well. We'd like everyone to hear your question. Opportunity to ask questions, not give speeches. Please allow everyone an opportunity to ask their questions. Please do not ask questions that have already been asked. And just a quick reminder that the purpose of the meeting is specifically to ask questions about the environmental statement and the EIA in relation to the ReGen project. As mentioned earlier, the panelists are not in a position to speak about the commercial aspects of the project, as those negotiations are still ongoing. And I want to bring in our panelists again that are on Zoom, Teams right now. If we can get them up on the screen and say hello, that would be very nice. I don't know if they're on the screen, but we can at least have them say hello. Andy Wilson from GHD, Liz Young, Michael McShelly, and Ali Sapti. Hi, guys. How are you? We got a few up there. Hi. There's some are on mute.
Good, thanks.
There we go. We got everybody there so you can kind of see them. But we do have some microphones. If you raise your hand, we'll get started with the question and answer session. They answered everything perfectly, is that correct?
I'm Norma Connolly from the Cayman Compass newspaper. I've got a couple of questions. One relates to the leachate from the existing landfill, which obviously remains unlined, and I'm not sure there's any way around that. But will we continue to see, for the rest of its existence, any leachate coming from that site?
I can probably field that question first, Norma. First of all, could I ask our consultants that are online, great to see you, maybe temporarily go on mute, unless we direct a question towards you. We're just getting some feedback here. So to your first question, obviously the site does generate leachate, and some of the leachate, and I can defer to either Andy or Blair on a more kind of technical aspect, having understood and they've read and understand the detail of the chemistry. But the reality is the remediation of the Georgetown landfill is essentially the best opportunity we have to reducing the amount of leachate. So whilst the site will always remain unlined from a basal liner perspective, there's no retrofitting that. Capping the site with an appropriate engineered cap, including a geosynthetic clay liner, and materials above that and site significantly reduces the amount of surface water infiltration through the waste mass that ultimately generates the leachate. So it does have a very, very positive effect on leachate generation ultimately in the site. So once the ReGen facilities are up and running and we've gone through the remediation process for the remainder of the Georgetown landfill and the current operational area, then there will be a significant amount of reduction in the leachate generation. I would also go to say that leachate by its chemistry will reduce over time. There's a dilution factor that will come into that. And obviously there will be a surface water management plan around the remediated landfill that will also tie into the ReGen facilities and ongoing monitoring. So the DEH will have ongoing responsibilities to monitor the leachate over years to come. Does that answer your question, or would you like to get more into the chemistry?
Well, one of the things when I was reading the report was a number of tests over the years has shown the presence of arsenic in the area. I just wondered if you could address that in any way, if this is something we should be concerned about down the road.
Andy, I might direct that to you. You're involved with the GHD remediations option study.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, and thanks everyone. Real pleasure to be here this evening. Yeah, we looked a lot at different capping and restoration options for the Georgetown landfill. So just going back to the previous question, it obviously makes sense to put a landfill cap on to reduce the amount of infiltration and therefore to reduce the amount of leachate that's generated. A lot of effort into looking at the surface water runoff so that we keep clean surface water clean and separate from leachate from the existing Georgetown landfill. In terms of the arsenic pit, we did a lot of work looking at where it is and where it will be in relation to the future ISWIMS facilities. And actually we ran through various options for what to do with the arsenic pit. So I think there were three options that we kind of boiled it down to. One was to dig it out and put it in the existing Georgetown landfill, which is obviously unlined. The other was to leave it in situ. And then the third one was to dig it out and put it into the new lined residual waste landfill. And to begin with, I think our preferred option, our definitely non-preferred option was putting it into the existing Georgetown landfill because it felt retrograde to go from having an existing lined site to putting in something that's non-lined. In respect to the other two, our initially preferred option was to put it into the residual waste landfill, but the space constraints on that mean that it's going to be difficult to accommodate all of that material within the RWL without sort of reducing the capacity of that to receive stabilized APCR and other materials from the ISWIMS operations. So our preferred option at the moment is to leave the arsenic pit where it is with its existing basal liner and capping, to put protection over the top of it, and actually then the new residual waste landfill will sit over the top of the new of the arsenic pit. So in terms of releases to the environment, you've got an existing liner, an existing cap, which will be overlaid by a new liner and a new cap. So our initial modelling shows that the additional release of or potential release of arsenic from the arsenic pit due to the surcharging of the RWL is at acceptable levels, and actually long term it seems to give the most benefit.
Thank you for that. If I could just ask one more as well. Is there a minimum amount of waste that needs to be burned at the new facility to make a profit or make it break even? And do we produce enough rubbish on this island to allow for that to happen?
Well, there's an operational minimum with regards to the facility that we're developing and its thermal capacity. There are no concerns on either the consortium side or the government sides that those minimum thresholds won't be met. The facility is being designed to accept existing and projected waste volumes. And it will, the reason we're developing an integrated facility is it will be trade-off of waste types through time, through the expansion of recycling, composting, and the diversion of waste types from the energy recovery facility into those other recycling facilities, as and when the collection infrastructure comes online to service them. And that's obviously a government and a DEH operational aspect. So there are no concerns with regards to the energy recovery facility not meeting its minimum operational requirements for operational efficiency.
Sorry, didn't hear you. Anyone else?
I'm Spencer Turner. I formerly worked for the government in Lands and Survey. Now I work for Bold Consulting, and I also lecture at UCCI. Question I'd like to ask is, how is it actually going to be powered? Is it going to be powered by diesel or burning the facility, or is it going to be powered by any other means?
Sorry, how is the energy from waste facility going to be powered?
Yeah.
The waste is the fuel.
The waste is the fuel.
So in essence, the residual waste that will be collected, your black bin waste and waste that cannot otherwise be recycled, will go into the energy recovery as a fuel. As I mentioned, it's a very well proven mass combustion system. So that waste generates, and the combustion of that waste generates the heat, which through the boiler generates steam. The steam drives the turbine, and the turbine generates the electricity. So in essence, obviously clearly different technology, but its functionality is where CUC are burning diesel to generate power, we're combusting waste as a fuel.
There'll be a pilot burning process, it's got to be.
Sorry, don't we
There'll be some pilot burning almost to kindle it. No, I mean essentially, obviously there's a startup process that might require fuel, but it's then essentially a self-perpetuating combustion process, and the waste is the fuel for the facility. So it's purely an energy from waste facility, with the residual waste being the fuel to ultimately generate the power. If you, we have a short video outside in the lobby, which kind of explains the process with some graphics that I think is quite a useful tool for people to look at. That's also on the ReGen.ky website. If anybody wants to view that, it gives a very clear, relatively simple but easily understood description of the energy from waste process.
Hi there, good evening. My name's Alex Woodcock. I work in Commander Bay. I have a question about the visual impact, in particular consideration as to how it would look by day and by night. So by day, the combustion, smoke plumes, how would that look visually? And then has consideration been given for how it would visually be at night? You know, we're all conscious of, light pollution. What considerations have been taken into account to deal with that?
Sure, I might pass over to Gord for that. From an air quality perspective and an emissions perspective,
From a visual perspective, you won't see, of course, we're going to have aircraft lighting on the stack, your typical red light. There's not going to be a huge amount of lighting from a visual perspective. There's not going to be a visible flame coming out of the stack. Not particularly in this climate, but in colder climates, sometimes you can see a little heat plume. And it's certainly not going to be, from a visual perspective, you're seeing black smoke or any kind of visible emissions, because, as we've mentioned previously, the air pollution control system is extremely robust and, predicated against global best practice standards. The facility itself obviously will have lighting, but most of that lighting will be at a lower operational level. It is a 24-hour facility, but it won't be accepting waste 24 hours a day, so there are limited operational times for the acceptance and vehicles entering and leaving the site. So we don't anticipate, and certainly you can correct me if I'm wrong, Erica, but the landscape and visual assessment did not come up with light pollution as being a significant effect on the project.
Anyone else? Any further questions? Going once. We're going to go twice. Last chance for questions. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for participating in the first public meeting on this format. We are going to have another meeting tomorrow, the 29th of August, at the John Gray Memorial Church in West Bay. That one starts at 5 p.m. Just to make note of that time is different from our normal ones. Then on Wednesday, August 30th, at the Mary Miller Memorial Hall in Red Bay, that one will start at 6 p.m. Also, please visit the ReGen.ky for their virtual engagement room for more information. I'd like to thank the panelists on the stage. I'd like to thank our mic holders, and I'd like to thank our panelists online for being here this evening. Thank you very much for being here as well. We wouldn't be here without you. So thank you and good night.